Hey, good morning and welcome. Ben with you once again for Studio on the Lake. The loons are out on the lake. It's really kind of nice sitting around here day or night. They're busy calling. That means the dwarves are going to be coming. A whole passel of them. And they're going to need some weapons. We're going to build Thor's Stormbreaker today. It's a piece of basswood. Some of that basswood that I have dried out in the shed. Had to find a piece big enough to do what we needed to do. These are the characters that are going to show up. And if you stick around or subscribe to the channel, lower right hand corner there, we're going to be building some more of this stuff. This seems to be the stuff for the time of the season, being we need weapons laying all around, otherwise somebody might be without a weapon. Pick up the gouge, cut this thing down. One of these days I'll finish that loon sitting over in the corner. And for those of you that are subscribed to the channel, I do have some video on the finishing of the dragon head, and I'll be putting that together. But this seemed more important. The grandkids have to have something to beat stuff up with. I gotta admit, this was fun to build. Thor's hammer was quite a bit of fun to build. Go back and take a look at that video. This one here, though, just something kind of unique about the whole thing. And ironically, when it's all done, it's a little lighter, even though it's bigger than Thor's hammer. Reference lines, always draw the reference lines on there. Helps stopping you from taking stuff away that you don't want to take away. Wood carving is subtractive, as you know, in art, and once you take it away, kind of hard to put it back. See my handy computer sitting there in the corner. Every once in a while I'll pull something up on that for a reference. I am not one of those as a kid who read all these comic books and can tell you the in and out story of this. If you do look up the research, Stormbreaker does have some interesting stories. If you get the right group of people together. Long discussions on how it's made, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of the age-old argument. Who would win, Superman or Flash? Starting to take shape, get the rough outline in there. For those of you that don't know, that blue represents goblin blood, if you happen to leave any of it on the carving towards the end. The kids will certainly ask you what it is. This thing was pretty intricate, actually. Like we talked about during Thor's hammer, this thing was supposed to have been forged, and those of you that know a little bit about forging will know that all of these lines and stuff would not be in a forged hammer. This thing was cast. The dwarves are cheating people when they're building this stuff in the mountain. They're casting it and passing it off as hand forged. You know what to do with that guy. You can whack him. These guys too. What good is this thing, you say? Well, get yourself a head of lettuce. A tomato or two. Evil onion or unhappy onion. And the old evil carrot. Some celery. a little bit of cheese. You can get that here in Wisconsin for sure. Then you're going to need this guy with Stormbreaker. Combine. This guy also good for tenderizing meat and that sort of stuff. A little hard on tomatoes perhaps. There are those people that will tell you there's no such thing as overkill. If you're going to pull off these little chunks, you're going to need some practice with this thing. But you're going to end up with a fine-looking salad like this when you're all done. Hopefully, you don't have to clean up the kitchen when you're done. Power carving. That's my older handpiece. Controller sits off to the side. There's two of those. I've got a newer one. This one's at 30,000 RPM. And right now I'm running a diamond bit on there, smoothing up and setting those lines. All told, this thing probably has about 4 hours into it. As per the norm, I went ahead and speeded everything up. This is averages about 4 times as fast. Starting to take shape. I'm going to leave it a little bit on the rough side. There's that sharpening slick. Love that thing. Works out pretty good for these gouges. You always want to keep them kind of razor sharp. Sharp tools, believe it or not, are safer than dull tools. They do what you want it to do. It doesn't take extra pressure, and you're less likely to slip or force your way through and end up cutting yourself. That rubber hammer in lieu of a wooden mallet. Gentler on the handles of the tools. Don't like to replace tool handles. Kind of setting the background down a little bit. That triangles pieces you see in the corner, and then there in the center, there's a ridge that sticks up in the V groove down the middle, and the handle of the head of the axe should be a little thinner than the rest of those. I think you see what I'm talking about in a forged deal. Here's the handle, roughly shaped out, and the head about ready to go. I can't do a whole lot more. For those of you that are familiar with the story, the handle of this broke off during a fight, and Groot went ahead and gave this thing a new handle. So it's going to end up looking like a tree branch. Therefore, the head of this thing is still in the block form, because I'm going to have to insert the handle and then carve this block in the center of the head there down to look like a tree branch. Or not necessarily a tree branch, because there's a lot of parts and pieces if you've ever studied Groot's actual anatomy. Little branches intertwined. Can't beat a Forstner bit. I'm not going to run this all the way through. I'm just going to run it up in the center there somewhere and give it about 3 inches. Take that 5-minute epoxy when we get there. I love this sitting on. This sits on the side and fuels my little torches, but really a nice size for reference and handles and stuff like this. Now we're just taking this down a little bit so it gets a nice friction fit in there. Doesn't have to be exact. That epoxy does need a little bit of room to work. I don't know if you can hear that Groot sleeping in the background. He's having a nightmare of chasing a rabbit that he can never catch. It's that Ramelson bench carving knife. A lot of the tools and stuff I use you can find down in the links down there. Or in the description, there's a link down there for those. That was a little too tight a fit. Had to whack it off. There's that 5-minute epoxy. No need for something to put this stuff on. Throw it right down their hole. Find a piece of scrap, the right size. Mix it up. Slap it together. A little friendly persuasion, perhaps. Get it lined up. Can't have a crooked handle. And set it. 5 minutes later, ready to go. Continue on with the next process, which would be carving that intricate twigs and whatnot down around the handle. Excuse me. I should probably edit that out, but I probably won't. You'll know. Some fine pattern work there. It's easy to get carried away when drawing a pattern and lose where you're at. So these in reality are just kind of reference flow lines of where things are going to go. It's one of those yellow Kutzall bits. It's considered to be a fine. And it does a pretty nice job, actually. I wouldn't call it fine. They make a green one that is rough or coarse. And this yellow cuts just as fine. There's the original Thor's hammer. And the guy destined to carry it around. Starting to look like it's supposed to look there in the middle. I showed these to 5-year-old grandson, the completed products, along with the sword that we did. There's a video on the sword, kid sword, wooden one. Renamed it Weed Whacker. These other ones it didn't have a name up until that point, so Weed Whacker seemed to be the correct thing. He liked the sword. showed him Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, and he said, "Hey, Papa Ben, I got one of those." Mine lights up. So I'm not sure how the wooden one will stack up against that, but when he saw this one, his eyes lit up, and this is definitely the one of choice. So the dwarves will be fighting long before they get their hands on these to see who gets to play with this one. I got to admit, this one's probably my favorite of the two hammers. When it's all done. If a guy was smart, he certainly wouldn't go through the bother of carving all this crazy stuff. You'd just give an impression of what's going on, but this one got a little more involved. You got to decide where these things overlap and go crossover, under, in, and around, and somehow you need to get a transition down into the handle there. I wish I'd left a little bit more at the top of that handle, but it all works out in the end, as you'll see. Then you have to carve everything back to where the handle grabs into there and the wood, and delineate the head of the axe. And that's what I'm doing now, kind of trying to blend down in, make it a natural flow. Hey, if you enjoy these videos, there's 12 or 15 of them out there, various different wood carving adventures. Haven't really done a whole lot of serious stuff. I hope in the future to get to that. I really want to do a big loon. It's one of my favorite things. I just haven't got around to it. Spring is here. That means that the garden needs plowed up out at the woodlot. The apple trees need some grafting because the deer went crazy. They had a particularly bad winter here. The mice and the deer wreaked havoc with the orchard. And that's going to need some fencing. We're going to need some time to get the bees up and established once again too. So, and I'm building a shop this year out there for working on my old antique cars. So you have an action-packed summer up ahead. There is a medallion on the end of this one, as well as a Mjolnir. One of my famous reference tools. Various different sizes of rounds. They're already laying around the shop. My daughter pointed out to me that I've been saying runes, as in old runes laying around, and they're actually runes. So when you put XIF, funny looking little triangles and that sort of stuff, they're runes, not ruins. Burning a stop cut reference line around this thing. Do the same thing with a sharp tool. This just seems to be quicker. It's something I've developed over the years, working on the decoys and the birds and the decorative decoys. It's easier to burn around a feather grouping or a feather line and then come back with a chisel and set the reference. There you see, taking the face of it down quite a bit so that medallion stands up, and everything needs beveled. Not trying for 100% precision work on this. If you're insane, you can go ahead and set your saws up. I certainly could do that and cut those perfectly fine and accurate and true. Might need a little mill work to get this thing, and certainly a lot more planning than I want to go through for clamping and working those angles out. Now, if you're working with a piece of metal, you certainly would want to do that. That'd be kind of fun, actually. Set the mill up and mill this thing out in actual steel. But we'd have to sacrifice one of those grandkids for a chunk of good steel to work. My son and I have forged hammers, and they're better off if you just go down and buy one. But just like anything else, it's a hobby. It costs money. And in reality, if you can find a production piece, it's going to be a tenth of the cost of what you put into it. But you don't get the satisfaction of wasting your time and having something done or something interesting you can hang around. I'm going to go ahead and set some highlights down in here with the burning pen. This one I'm going to go ahead and finish. I'll probably put some Danish oil on it, just a nice quick finish, easy. It'll muddy it up a little bit. Won't be quite as clean, but it'll have an interesting look. Still haven't completely defined where all of these twigs and branches and stuff intertwine going onto this handle here. These burn marks are kind of setting those reference lines. You'll see as I start to develop those and back cut, undercut those just a little bit more. Trying to make a logical flow here. One goes over, one goes under, one comes around, etc. You don't want any pigs in space out there that don't necessarily go anywhere. Kind of like in the way that this is laid out now. This part, if you reference the various different drawings and whatnot of this thing, it just kind of ends in a blunt branch there that's has that look about being rotted away. We go look at a stump, it'll start to wear down through the various different layers. Guess I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention to in frame there. I must have looked up at the camera and saw that I wasn't there. You don't need to adjust your set. This thing's floating in and out of focus. For some reason, my big old white hand is something better to focus on than what I'm actually doing on occasion. There's no production staff here, nobody behind the camera, no magic man behind the mirror or the curtain. It's just me. The camera sitting over there doing its thing. Got to admit, though, that camera is smarter than I am. You could take a college course on that Canon EOS 70D that I use to film most of this stuff. It'll do things that I don't even understand. These videos are put together and rendered down with a program I really like quite a lot, DaVinci Resolve 15. It's nice to work with. It does have a little bit of a learning curve. If you're not a video editor or went to school to learn how to edit videos, there's some stuff in there that you're going to have to keep referencing back and forth to see how to make it work. Kind of wanted to blend a little bit, grab one of those small torches. Same kind of torch you see on a cooking show where they're building creme brulee. Of creme brulee, and burning the top, making it all pretty. I use this to burn the fuzz off of the carbide tips and various different things around the shop. It sits over on the right side that you never get to see, which is my little carving bench. There it is, pretty well set up. I like the look of it. Not going to do a whole lot more to it. I will put that finish on here in just a second, as you'll see. Stormbreaker, taking shape. Can't beat Danish oil. Brush it on, wipe it off. If you put 4 or 5 coats of this stuff on there, it'll really build up a nice finish. This is not going to get but the one. You can see that there some various different grain in there and coloration on the wood. Hey, this guy running around the shop, my inappropriate mouse. I leave him alone. He's not hurting anybody. And there it is. Ready for making a salad or whatever else you can think to use for it. That one kid really liked the looks of this thing, and it's going to be pretty popular. So there you have it, Thor's Stormbreaker. This is a studio on the lake. Beautiful. We've got to get the dock in, and we can start doing some fishing without coffee, drilling holes in the ice, that sort of thing. If you like it, go ahead and leave a comment and subscribe. Once again, Ben for Studio on the Lake. Thanks for hanging out with me.